教授跟学生都会来给大家报。欢迎大家来到今天吴明益与Richard 那个谈生态文学的生态书写的活动。我们今天把这次的活动划分成2个阶段。第一个角是我们请吴明益老师跟Richard老师各自朗读他们文学作品里面的部分段落。我们希望对2个作者的说辞的介词能够得到一个具体的感受。然后现在我请大家以热烈的掌声欢迎国立台湾师范大学文学院长兼郭文熙教授跟台湾文学学会的理事长徐文蔚老师开场。
各位好，那欢迎各位来到师大文学院的人文季活动。今天很高兴是有机会和台湾文学学会合办这一场是学会的前进世界论坛系列活动当中很重要的一个场次啊。那台湾文学学会过去一直都积极的把台湾文学向外扩张。其实我之前也参加过一次这样的论坛，是针对新加坡来谈台湾的数位文学，所以我们要非常感谢我的恩师，台湾文学学会真正的理事长吴芳梅老师来到现场。不单司仪说我是理事长，我是另外一个是台湾中文学会。好，那台师大比较活跃一点。那这个活动同时也结合了潮永和文教基金会跟国科会的力量来共同完成，所以都要感谢这么多美好的音乐。那这场活动特别要感谢台师大英语系的贝和泰老师在现场。贝和泰老师是德国伯恩大学英语学系的博士，那他的专长是环境生态批评、美国文学、伦理学。那要联系这么复杂的一个活动，非常的不容易。I want to express my gratitude and extend a warm welcome to Dr. Kerridge. Traveling all the way to Taipei to share your insight with us. Thank you very much. 那当然，同时也要感谢吴明益老师，他是台湾重要的生态学家以及文学作家。那我们是不是在对谈之前，我们先代表台师大致赠我们的回国的纪念品给2位啊？好，谢谢。
Look at camera like 1, 2, 3, cheese. Look again, 1, 2, 3. Okay, let me check it. Thank you.
好，那我们活动分成2个单元。第一个部分是作家的作品的朗读跟导读。那我们一开头第一个部分我们会先邀请到吴明益老师来和我们分享他非常重要的一个著作，就是《海洋酒店》。那吴明益老师我非常喜欢他最近这个新书上面的介绍他提到他自己有时写作，有时画图，有时摄影，有时耕作。那我和吴明益老师同事接近20年的时间就是就近的观察他。那他确实是一个非常非常特别的老师。那他会带动学生去阅读而阅读的同时必须要到田野当中去实际的进行生态观察。那所以他的作品的生态知识、自然的科学的内涵，然后以及他非常我觉得优雅的文笔然后对于世界文学的认知，其实都超越了台湾当代非常多重要的作家。那他的散文《离别至蝶道》、家里手边那么近，浮光不管是从生态到摄影都是很迷人的 书写。那短篇小说集《本日公休虎》也《天桥上的魔术师》跟《苦雨之地》也都受到大家的欢迎。那当然，很重要的是他的长篇小说。那大家在书写睡眠的航线的时候，曾经请假1年，当时其实是递出辞呈，然后说他不教书了，要专心写作。还好当时我们的院长非常的坚决的说：“你先去写吧，写完再说。”然后让他休假1年，然后写完以后，还好他这个迷途知返知道到我们的文学院当中。那所以陆续后来又推出了《复眼》跟《代车时前集》，我相信都影响我们当代的小说书写非常的深。那他同时从博士论文开始，就是在进行自然书写的理论建构。这个在台湾来讲的话，绝对是先行者，所以他以书写解放自然系列的3册的文论，那不管是对 non-fiction writing 或是对于小说的研究，都有非常指标性的影响。那如果今天的题目是我们台湾文学向世界前进的话，吴明益老师的作品已经翻译为20多国的语言，而且他的译作得到这个各国的翻译奖，也是相当的知名的，像法国的岛屿文学奖、日本的本夫大赏的翻译类奖，那也进入到英国的曼布克国际奖的入围名单当中。那所以都可以知道，吴明益老师的写作事实上正是我们今天整个活动的大标题就是往世界前进的台湾文学里头很重要的一环。那如果是在华语世界的重要的小说评比当中，像亚洲周刊的年度10大小说，亚洲浸会大学办理的《红楼梦》的小说奖的专家推荐奖，那以及台北的国际书展小说奖、台湾文学经典奖、联合报文学大奖、金鼎奖的年度的图书奖跟 Open Book 这个年度好书奖，吴明益老师都是常客，而且他事实上是很谦逊的，他自己现在慢慢的都拒绝参与这些奖项，希望更多人年轻人有机会。那作为他这个常年的同事，今天机会听说到可以来主持这样子的一个工作，都是兴奋的不得了所以就来了他。那我相信现在网络上应该有非常多这个粉丝也很开心有机会能够听吴明益老师来读他的小说，我们是不是一起热烈的掌声欢迎吴明益老师？
谢谢院长，谢谢Kerridge教授，就这个邀约真的很漫长，对吧？很多年之前，Professor Kerridge 就跟我提到这件事情，但是因为疫情的关系所以就一直没有成型，就是Kerridge先生就一直没有成型。那终于见到。本来我也应该待在花莲，因为2位他们即将会去花莲，虽然大地震给他们行程还是照旧，可是我这礼拜在台北的那个 PID 担任评审，所以整个礼拜都在看片子，没有办法去花莲，所以我找了这个一个台湾很好的生态摄影叫白清源先生当他们的导游，让能够有外国的作家到花莲，我觉得这是最棒的事情，因为他们可以认识到台湾的很重要的一面。那因为今天因为我的任务就是要朗读，我原本拿了旧的东西给那个 Kerridge， 他问说他希望那个我能够读新的作品，那我就问了，因为我的翻译那个 Kerridge 他已经把整本小说的译完，因为他们要推版权所以译完，所以他就非常高兴的说他觉得比这一段好，所以我今天读了这一段的英文的，我不知道会不会秀出来，会吗？那英文就是那个 Kerridge 的翻译。那 Kerridge 他在翻译我的作品的时候，常常跟我有非常多的问题。我们等于是已经是超过10年的伙伴，所以有很多的过程，就是我觉得如果有一天我会把它写下来，就他谁问过我的一些问题的，都让我可以反省我的这个中文的写的文字的精准，或者是某一种内涵上面的意象。 那我就来读海丰酒店里面的这一段好吗？这一段小说的一开始啊，就是两个孩子的相遇，所以会有。男孩已经是第3天看到那只狗，巨人迪拉姆也连续3天注视他们。这天太阳带着鲜红色的明亮，很像是受伤的人的血。男孩是体格结实，有着浅褐色头发和机灵眼神的孩子，他正跟踪白狗。但他假装是在跟踪一头山猪，白狗不晓得从哪里冒出来了。从某一天开始，就迈着犹豫的步子，在村子的边缘寻找功能器的便当盒。几天前，他兴奋地把头钻进一个便当盒的缝隙里，吃到带着碎肉的排骨时，把头往后拉，橡皮筋跟着唰滑进镜子。那瞬间，白狗吓得往上一跳，就再也甩不了他。他就渴，跑到溪边饮水，水却到喉咙的地方就流了回来，就有一小部分进到胃里去。晚上饥饿唤醒白狗，他走到白天有人烟的地方，幸运地找到路边纸袋里残余的鸡骨头，只是他无法完成吞咽。小小的灵魂同时升起了渴望和沮丧，尝试了几次，沮丧逐渐超过渴望。白狗在寻找食物与无法吞咽的过程里反复挣扎，辛苦半天找到了空壳，偶尔发现食物又无法下咽，他急得团团转，离开，寻找，离开，身体逐渐虚弱，睡意渐渐强过饥饿感，终于躺在草丛里睡着。睡梦中的白狗依然在找便当盒，不过梦里的他犹豫了，不敢靠近。第4天的时候，男孩远远发现瘦骨嶙峋的白狗半躺在草丛里。他和暑假从南边的部落跟着妈妈回来的比萨玩扮演猎人的游戏时，无意间惊动了他。比萨拿起一颗石头往前一丢，白狗惊慌，奔跑到10几公尺外，回头睁着迷惘忧郁的眼神看着他。我马当山猪最好，这只狗拜托，看起来像是婴儿啊。它的脖子好像有什么，把橡皮筋啊，笨狗被橡皮筋套住了。比萨仔细一看，说那条橡皮筋已经深深陷入他脖子，看起来就像要切断他的气管。流血了，别丢它吧。这时，男孩才发现这几天自己一直惦记着白狗。昨天，男孩花了1天想找白狗，却没发现。第6天也是，男孩心想：会不会白狗死了？他马上告诉他们：如果你想认识一条陌生的狗，不是你养大的狗，你要有耐心。我会耐心的，我会耐心的。男孩告诉自己。第7天黄昏，他巡视的范围延伸到目的地附近，在最大的石架旁边找到躺着的白狗。白狗不知道该拔腿就跑，还是应该装腔作势表达愤怒，眼神恐惧又尴尬。男孩挥挥手上的山猪肉干，丢到他面前。他鼓起最后的余力，奋起跳开，一口一口远离，好像那肉干是毒药。男孩跟在后头，白狗加快速度，保持着几米的距离。渐渐的，这距离越拉越近。男孩握着小猎刀的手心出汗，说不定它可以成为我的猎犬。白色的狗不像黑色的狗那么勇敢，印象中他妈这么说过。颜色会有差吗？真的啊，白色的狗不像黑色的狗那么勇敢。他妈说，这是不会，这不是会不会的问题，这是道理。你知道吗？这是道理，这是不是道理？没有道理。幻想中的他妈没有在表示反对，用半是挑衅、半是质疑的眼神看着他。这一切巨人听他们都透过秀莲画眉傍晚时传来的讯息而了然于胸。巨人想象着男孩跟踪狗的样子，不禁笑了起来，同时心底一个念头浮现：就在太阳刚刚坠落不久的时刻，他在路的尽头趴了下来，张开嘴，在不明朗的天色里，他的嘴看起来就像是一个巨大深暗的山洞。在今天活动之前呢，其实大概2个月前呢，我跟这个Kerridge教授还有Richard，我们有在线上开过一次会。那 我记得Richard有提到，就是说他现在的作品写虚构的小说，像他一开始就是写这个non-fiction，因为他很有名的一部作品就是《口那我这次花莲找的那位向导，他是蛇类的专家，就是新。
Yes, thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to finally, you already mentioned that, we've been trying to arrange for an event like this for many years. So I'm extremely pleased to finally be able to introduce Richard Kerridge to you. The American environmentalist Elder Leopold very famously wrote that one of the penalties of an ecological education is to live in world tenets. And I think that's a statement from the late 40s, but it's probably more true today than it ever was. And I think one of the effects that it has had is that a lot of environmentalist discourse these days kind of bifurcates between, on the one hand, being kind of mad with grief and despair, or being optimistic on the basis of kind of willful ignorance. It's very difficult to kind of keep your balance between these two untenable positions. And I think one of the voices in environmental thinking today who does that really, really well is Richard. Who in his work is deeply informed by ecological understanding. It's always clear-eyed, and at the same time, it's always filled with humor and an appreciation of the absurdity of our situation. So it's, hearing him speak is always a pleasure. I know him originally as a scholar more than as a creative writer. But he really is both. He was one of the people who got ASME UPI, the Association for the Study of Literature and the Environment in the UK, off the ground. He was the first president of that organization. He co-edited one of the first eco-critical collections of essays, Writing the Environment, with an introduction to that volume, right? Which I've quoted I don't know how many times, and it's still worth reading, but even though it's already 30 years, almost 30 years old at this point, right? Sorry. 对不起，你请先翻译。
所以今天真的非常谢谢，然后很荣幸，在这么多年之后的话，终于可以 邀请到就是 Kerridge， 然后这个东西我们这次的活动然后可以成型。那这边的话我想讲一下就是那一位所以就是因为我想要引用的一段就是一位很重要的自然生态学家自然作家叫做 Richard， 然后他在讲的说就是教育好像就是永远都是在我们在试图跟创造在共处的这样子一个过程。那我觉得这一个虽然是已经是30-40年前所说的一句话，可在今天的话依然还是非常的现实。因为就是我想现在当我们在谈论这些环境的议题的时候，其实我们要么就是会过度的悲观，要不然就是会过度的乐观。我们好像会就是都有非常多的对于我们现在的这个实际有一些过度的这一种不够了解的这样子一种认知。所以我想要在这乐观跟悲观之间要达成一个平衡，其实这是非常困难的。但我觉得 Richard Kerridge 是在这个点上，就是在这件事情上面做得非常好的一位作家。那么，因为他不管是在他对于自然生态的这样子的很深刻的了解，那他也一直都是用一种非常亲民的眼光去看待我们所面对的这个时代，然后以及我们，而且同时他在作品当中的话，始终都保持着一种幽默，而且也一直都意识到，就是我们人类的这个处境到底是一个所存在的一种必然的荒谬。所以今天的话，真的是非常高兴可以在这个现场，然后可以听到他跟我们讲述他的作品，以及在讲述自然写作的这个主题。对，那我过去的话认识他的话，一直都是就是认识到他是以学者的身份，而不是一位这个作家。但是他其实在这个就是在作者的这个他创作的层面上面，其实一直也都有很高的成就。那么他目前曾经是担任过就是英国的一个非常重要的学会的这一个会长。那么他也就是共同就是编辑的这个很重要的一个英国的这个自然文学这一个选集。那他也就是写了一篇非常重要的一篇导读。那这篇导读虽然已经是在30年前写的，但是我依然至今还是会常常在引用这篇文章。
Realize my introduction's already too long. Yeah, I mean I think his book called Love, that's already out for 10 years at this point, right? It's been referred to by reviewers as a minor classic. It's a really wonderful example of what nature writing can be today. I think very importantly, he's a pedagogue also. I mean, we've been running the MA program in creative writing at Bath University, which is one of the most prestigious creative writing programs in the UK. And I think you've been the teacher of many writers who might at this point be more famous than you. But yes, and so I think that, well, also that Oakland received the Roger Deacon Award. I mean, you're very active as a public intellectual, and he's writing also reviews for The Guardian, which are freely available online. So if you want to get a taste of his writing, you might Google for his name and Guardian, and you'll find some of the reviews that he wrote. So I'm extremely pleased to finally have you in Taiwan, Richard. And with that, I'm going to ask about.
Thank you very much.
I'm really not thinking good.
那么的话，就是这边的话可以看到，就是他在10年前所写的这一本能写的这个作品。那么他在可能书评界的话，也是誉为就是一个一代的经典。那么就是他同时也是一位很知名的一个教授，教书，他是在英国的这个 Bath 的这个学校教导的这一个创意写作这个学程。那么Bath 的这个学程的话，是在英国的一个非常重要的一个创意写作的学程。那么他的底下的学生很多，也许现在都已经是比他更有名的一些作家。那他也曾经这本书获得了这个 Roger Deacon 的这个文学奖。那他同时也是在为英国的卫报写作书评，所以各位如果有兴趣读他的写作的话，也欢迎就上网搜寻，然后可以搜寻到卫报上面他有非常棒的书评。那再次的话，我非常感谢今天，然后也非常高兴今天终于可以邀请到 Richard Deacon 上我的简介到这个为止。谢谢。
Thank you very much. I have to try to live up to the reputation that I've already been given. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Dean. Thank you to the organisers and sponsors who made this event possible. And thank you, Ming-Yi. It is such an honour to share the stage with such a superb and important novelist, and indeed nature writer. So I hope we can have, in the second part, an interesting conversation that will explore many aspects of our work. And the writer about ants, the professor that you mentioned, that was Edward O. Wilson, who wrote the novel about ants. But I should also mention that Hannah's here in a collection of eco-critical essays called Material Eco-Criticism. He wrote an essay arguing a point about new materialism, which is also a piece of nature writing about ants. So the ants are more than they seem, but I don't think there will be more ants today. I'm going to read a short story. It's actually quite a long short story. It will take about 25 minutes, so please be patient with me. Should I have the yeah.
那么今天的话，真的很高兴可以来到这个地方。那么的话，也再次感谢就是徐院长以及就是这次的主办单位组成的这一次的活动。那也很高兴就是可以终于跟吴明益老师可以见面。然后我们今天很期待的可以去对谈，就是这个我们今天的这个主题。那吴明益老师也是一个非常非常重要的作家，也是自然写作的这领域的一个很重要的泰斗。所以今天非常期待可以在今天的下半场中可以有一个非常丰盛的一个讨论的这个机会，然后来谈谈我们的作品。刚才有提到的那位哈佛大学的这一个教授，就是写作这个蚂蚁主题的那一位教授，就是叫做 Edmund Wilson。那么其实他其实在这个部分蚂蚁的话题的话，其实他们教授的话，他是自己过去曾经所编过的一本，就是在讲这一个物质主义的这个生态批评的时候，从新物质主义的角度上面，也曾经写过一篇很重要的论文，然后其中谈的也是蚂蚁的这个主题，所以就是可以看到，就是说其实就是蚂蚁的主题真的是非常非常非常的多嘛。那今天的话，也许我们就不会聚焦在蚂蚁的这个部分。那接下来的话，我会想朗读我的一篇短篇小说，那其实是有一点点长，大概会花25分钟的时间。那就大家可以收听聆听。
I will read this short story. It's called The Cow. I don't think we're going to stop the translation, are we, from the story itself?
It's going to be written back so people can follow along.
Yes, yes. So this is The Cow. It is a story about a mother and her young son.
这是个 brief description。所以那今天的话朗读的这篇短篇小说叫做《幼师》。那这一篇小说的话，谈的就是一对母子之间的这个故事。
Mom, look at this one. Robin's voice came from his tent on the living room floor. He had taken the sofa cushions and propped them against each other, and now he was lying inside on his tummy, his legs sticking out at the back. Kate pictured him there in the dark, with the light on his face from the laptop. He liked to wall himself in. She looked at the ransacked sofa. At least nothing nasty had been revealed when he pulled off those cushions. Only a Lego piece and a biro missing his cap. She'd had visions of months-old slices of pizza covered in fluff. Mum, you've got to see this. I'm coming. I'll just put the washing on. Back from the kitchen a few minutes later, she stood over Robin's legs at the rear of the tent. One foot was up in the air, presenting a grubby sole. Kate looked at the crinkled skin and thought she saw white calluses just beginning to fall under the brow. I used to kiss that foot, she thought, and sometimes bury my nose in the back of a knee, or I nibbled his toes, num, num, num.
Yes, he used to like that. He would hate it now. Or would he? In the right mood, he might still be pleased. He was only 7. I know you're there, Mum. She bent down and tickled his legs. When they thrashed, all the cushions fell down. Oh, Mum! He had rolled over now on his back. Why did you do that? Because you're so irresistible. Mum, I just wanted to show you this film. Okay, what is it? Come on, Mum, sit down. Robin said, come on, Mum, all the time. There were days when he seemed to have said it about 80 times. When she was busy, the phrase pestered Kate, but still she loved it. And sometimes she whispered the words to herself. Come on, Mum, come on, Kate. Particularly, she remembered the time on the landing when Robin stood in her bedroom doorway and said, come on, Mum, we can hit each other with slippers. Kate had exploded with laughter, delighting her son so much that he tried the same words again and again. For weeks. If Kate was cross, if he thought he had done something wrong, he would say the words just out of nowhere, regardless of whether or not there were slippers available. Then he would search her face for that laughter, and if she did not laugh, or not quite so loudly, he looked hurt and puzzled. They still did the slipper fight sometimes, 1 slipper each, when Robin was in the right mood and a prod from her finger would bring back his little boy's self. Come on, Mum. He was sitting up now. Kate squatted and then sat beside him, her legs stretching out next to his. The laptop was on his knees, and she glimpsed a movement, some animals in a dry landscape. Robin's arm came creeping around her waist. At first, he walked it there on 2 fingers and then grabbed her tight. Together, they shuffled backwards on their bottoms towards the wall. As they did this, he looked up and met her gaze with a grin. When their backs were against the wall, he moved the computer onto her thighs and snuggled up, pushing his arm in again behind her. Her hip felt him fidgeting, trying to settle. She always liked that. On the screen, lionesses were crouching in ambush. 3 of them, heads rising out of the grass. Kate knew this film. Robin watched it a lot. Cameras were clicking rapidly somewhere off picture, but the scene did not zoom in. It was YouTube, not television. Kate could zoom in her head, though. She thought of those eyes, amber marbles, but somehow anxious as well as hard. Watching with Robin, she'd seen quite a few lionesses. Next thing, the buffalo herd would come thundering down the dry riverbed, filling the air behind them with dust that drifted like smoke. Kate relished this moment, the surge of it, sudden, like music. Here they come, she said. No, Mum, I wanted to show you a different film. It took so long, I was bored, so I started this one. The herd was in full stampede, filling the screen. All right, but let's watch this first. The bit I like best is coming. Okay, he squeezed up against her. The last stragglers galloped through, and when the dust cleared, the 3 lionesses were there, on a calf, sitting round it and holding it down. Oh my God, said a man's voice, American. Oh my God, look, it's a kill. The camera moved off down the riverbed. Here was the herd. It had halted, a black mass of buffalo milling about. Faces were turned to look back at the lions. It was muddy here. Hoofprints were everywhere, but buffalo paced to and fro and then trotted off in the lion's direction, their heads tossing nervously. One was a bull. Underneath it, a tassel was jiggling. The herd followed like a black sheet. Back into view came the lionesses, still on the calf. They waited, tense with movement about to happen. The 3 buffalo stopped. One pranced in a circle, bucking. Behind them, the herd still this way and that, advancing, retreating. The lions didn't move. Out of the mass then, a single buffalo charged, quite a small one. Head down, it ran at the lions. That's the mum, Kate said. At this point, she always did. The lionesses jumped up and backed away quickly, but lingered, reluctant to leave. When they did turn and scamper, some buffaloes chased them, but the one that had first charged remained with the calf, the one that Kate thought was the mum. The calf was unmoving. Dead, the American said, in a tone of finality, no question mark in his words. But the mum, having sniffed at the calf, took a few steps back and then lunged at the body. She butted it, hooking her horns underneath it and tossing the calf to its feet. The floppy legs crumpled, but as it went down, the calf twitched into life. It rolled, its legs kicked, its mouth opened. Again, the mum prodded. Its hindquarters tried to stand up. Kate could see the effort. The calf could not straighten its front legs. It seemed at the end of its strength and collapsed, but the mother came in with her head once again, and this time the youngster stayed upright and took a few staggering steps. At this, Kate and Robin clapped, always. Kate let out a breath, and behind the camera, the tourists too were applauding. But Robin said, "Okay, Mum," and clicked on the go back arrow. A chorus of white toilets appeared. They were swaying to big band music. Skip ad came up, and Robin clicked on it, his fingers stroking the touchpad with expert. And Kate thought of how, as a baby, he'd crawled around the room, patting surfaces with a flat hand. "Here it comes, Mum." Cloudy green water, loud breathing and bubbling were somewhere. How far could you see in that dense green? You couldn't be sure. Was it hundreds of feet or just inches? Clots of algae came out of the green fog and up to the screen, where some of them seemed to get caught momentarily, as if they would silt it up. Then they drifted away. The cloudiness, she realized, consisted of particles of this stuff, mostly too small to see. And which way was she looking? Sideways or down? A brown blur appeared, a mass of fish wriggling. They crossed the screen from right to left. Tiny or distant? Kate couldn't tell. Then one came across that was nearer, and Kate could see clearly the stripes on its back. She was looking down at it. The fish exited left. A royal, a small turbulence down there, tiny but growing larger. It's not a shark, is it? Just watch, Mum. I don't want to look at a shark. A diver's black flipper bumped into the screen. The view jerked and wobbled, a flurry of bubbles, confusion, a bit of white ankle. The foot disappeared, leaving Kate looking down at the shape coming up, a huge mouth, as she saw now, a great pleated billowing bag. It was on her so quickly, the darkness consumed the whole screen. Had the camera been swallowed? Next thing, a view on the surface. A white boat a little way off, blue sky, choppy sea, flocking gulls, and up came a lot of small fish jumping into the air, and then a whale's shiny black nose. It grew larger, the sun sparkled on it. Then came the other jaw, rising, becoming the whole mouth, and carrying upwards a lake of seawater. The huge pleated throat was all visible now. The great gulp of sea stretched the pleats out to flatness, and then, in a huge wobble, went down the bag. A gasp came from somewhere off camera. "God," Robin said. It was small at her side. Kate saw that the nose carried ridges of barnacles. What would it feel like to touch? The skin would be rubbery smooth, but those shells running quickly under her hand would cut. as the body, half out of the water, hung in the air, she noticed a sea plant, like a small tree, that seemed to have rooted itself in the pleats, where it hung upside down, jerking floppily. Those barnacle clusters were scab-like. They looked painful, swollen. The body began to fall crashingly onto the water, and at the same time to slide back in gently. There was a crash, then it was gone. White rivulets, seabirds circling and diving. The film changed. A man in a hospital bed faced the camera. His shirt was wide open. White circular stickers held tubes to his chest. The camera zoomed to his unshaven face as the man started talking. He was American. Came up beneath me, he said. I was picked up and flung, and I thought I was inside the mouth, but I wasn't. Damn close, though. It touched me. Kate looked at his chest on the bed. Wispy smudges of hair, red marks. That chest hair was just like Martin's, she noticed. Well, a bit skimpy like Martin's. Shut down that thought. A whale could swallow Martin any time, be my guest. It would spit him out. She laughed at the thought of him in that bed, milking it for the camera. The film reran the sequence, the mouth coming up from below and the whale rising out of the water. Then Robin put it on pause. What do you think, Mum? I don't know, she said. It was scary. It's all right. It couldn't have swallowed it, Mum. They only eat tiny things, plankton. Their mouths have these great filters, like big brushes. Didn't you notice? Shall I run the film back? No, not just now. I've too much to do. Darling, why do you like watching that? Dude, he'd recently started to call her this. It's the way the mouth comes up towards you, so fast. It's not there and then suddenly coming. I feel like it's going to get me. And whoa, Robin punched at the air. It's okay, Mum. I always dodge it. In the kitchen, Kate imagined the man in the darkness inside the whale's mouth. I thought, this is it, he had said. I told myself, Gary, you're not going to get out of this one. She imagined herself in her bathing suit, swimming or treading the water, watching something, and then in the mouth, in the blackness, slipping downwards. No, this cannot be true, she would think. This just cannot be happening. It isn't. Seconds ago, everything was just fine and familiar. Why can't I step back to that? And at that moment, Robin cried out, no! A rising involuntary cry. And then, Mum, he shouted. She rushed in and found him there. Cushions were strewn on the floor. Among them, the laptop lay open with animals on the screen moving. Robin was some way away by the wall, standing and shaking. He pointed from there at the laptop. Kate ran up to hug him. What is it? Her lips felt the tears on his cheek. He pointed again. Why did it have to? Why what? He was silent, just pointing. Let's sit down together. No, I won't watch it again. Well, I'll have a look. Kate picked up the laptop and went to the table. Robin would not leave the wall. There were African elephants on the screen, a group packed together, blocking a rutted lane. But Kate stopped the film and hit the back arrow. She wanted the bit that had upset Robin. This time the ad was for holiday homes on a beach in the tropics. Palm trees, white sand, pale blue water, white buildings. Kate had to wait for a countdown before she could skip it. Next came a man on a fallen tree in a field, a bearded man. It was hard to say where the place was. The grass was green, and the tree trunk looked English, its bark a familiar texture. A caption came up saying, Doug the Ranger. Doug probably wasn't in England. He wore a safari hat and shorts and one of those khaki waistcoats covered in pockets. Doug explained that we were about to see something not very nice. Interesting, yes, he said, sighing toughly, but hard to watch and challenging to accept. If we didn't want to see it, the link at the top would take us to something more cute and cuddly. No? Then let's go straight to the video. A lion was crouching at a kill, biting at it. A big male lion with a gingery mane. The flesh he was eating had a black hide. Perhaps it was buffalo. No, too small. Maybe warthog or buffalo calf. Further off, lionesses sat in the grass. The camera went slowly round and then back to the male, his black lip and lower jaw hanging loose and slack. Kate had seen this expression on male lions before. It looked slovenly, insolent, but also guilty and caught out, defiant against an accuser. Also, it was a panting and desperate look, the look of an animal cornered and already tired. The sunken, defensive eyes told the same story. She and Robin knew this look from another favourite film, the one when a young male lion was trapped by hyenas and only saved by his brother's last-minute arrival. The big male looked up. A sound or a scent or a movement that caught its attention. It jumped and stood staring off to the right. In profile, the body was heavy, smooth-muscled and hard. Apart from the mane and the tuft on the tail, the skin was quite bare. If Kate ran her hand on it, she would feel stiff hairs, she thought, and the tautness of muscle. When the lion moved, the skin wrinkled. It bounded out of the frame. As the hindquarters exited, Kate saw the jutting testicles bobble. Trying to follow, the camera moved past something blurred, maybe the window frame of a car or jeep. The picture refocused just as the bounding lion reached a younger one, low in the grass. No mane. This one looked like a year-old cub. The big lion leapt past and turned to jump from behind on the young one. A screeching of snarls, then the big lion's hunched back took up most of the picture, showing the knobs of the spine. The big lion was doing something intently. The little one struggled beneath. More screeching. Kate couldn't move. The lioness ran up and bared her teeth, circling to find a way in. The camera moved to a different angle, and Kate saw the little lion twisting and trying to bite at the large one, but getting caught up in the mane. A crescendo of snarling. The big male let go and stood up and turned and walked out of the screen. Kate was left with the little one, struggling to raise its head out of the grass. It fell back. The camera moved to the big lion at the kill, standing calmly. It turned its head once to look back, but then settled into stillness, gazing the other way into the distance. Beneath the lips, a pale, fluffy beard came to a point and composed a face that looked gravely sensitive, like a lion in Trafalgar Square. Aslan's face had looked like this in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, which Kate and Robin had watched together. Liam Neeson's voice went through that face. But the camera went now to the young lion, crawling using its front legs only and dragging its hindquarters, which couldn't move. The spine was twisted, and while the head and shoulders were upright, the back legs lay sideways, flat on the ground. Dragging them, the little lion's back arched with effort, but the face was still eager. and seemed to ask, I'll be okay, won't I? If I carry on, I really will be okay. The features seemed unable to change to register what had happened. They were set in that eagerness. Saliva hung from the mouth, though, and Kate, watching closely, began to reinterpret the features. They began to look dazed. She began to see stress there and worry, though the expression was just the same. Doug's voice began to explain what had happened, dryly and carefully, sounding a little subdued. Kate knew the reason anyway. Robin might know it as well. Other films they'd watched had talked about this, though none had displayed it so cruelly. The males, when they killed or drove out a pride leader, would kill all the cubs and yearlings, or try to. This brought the females back into heat and meant that the new male's cubs would grow up to inherit. Tigers did it as well. Turn it off, Robin was calling behind her. Turn it off, please, Mum. I don't want to see it. She closed the computer. Robin came up to her then. He climbed on her lap, which these days he didn't do often. She hugged him. Why did he do it, Mum? Did you see the poor little one crawling? The man says it's going to die. Kate nodded. Yes, I saw it. What else could she say? They are lions, darling. They sometimes do that. It's terribly sad. The big one had taken over the pride, and it wasn't his cub. But it's not the cub's fault. No, it's not. I hate that big lion. He exploded in tears once again. Yes, it's hateful, she said. But look, Rob, there's one thing. Animals don't live in time like we do. They don't have a strong sense of past and future. Animals live in the moment. They don't look ahead or remember. When lions relax lying under the trees, they aren't anxious about how their lives will end. They don't ask themselves questions. That little one suffered some pain, but it didn't know what was going to come next. It didn't know what it all meant. Kate wasn't sure how true this all was, but she carried on. That's nature's kindness. If you live in the moment, you only experience that moment. Everything happens so quickly. As she said it, she thought of the man in the whale's mouth. Robin had listened and seemed a bit calmer. He said he would tell them about it at school. That's a good idea, darling. Explain that the cub didn't suffer that much. Two thoughts came to her quickly as she said this. One was that the little lion, if he'd grown up, would have behaved in exactly the same way as the male that had killed him. The other was, Martin, why didn't your son's face move you enough for you to want to stay with him? Why didn't it change your brain, as they say that a baby's does for a mother? This was a thought she had had before, and she closed it down as she had trained herself to be able to do. And at this, Kate remembered a man on the radio, a professor or something. What was it she'd heard him say? It was in a discussion, yes, all about mothers. And this man, this professor, had said something shocking. We had to remember, he said, that before modern medicine, so many children died as babies or in their first 10 years that mothers could not afford emotionally to become attached in the way that we do now. Maternal love, as we know it, he said, is a modern invention. Did he say invention? Or some other word? Don't misunderstand, he had gone on to say. I don't mean that mothers in those days did not love their children. I mean that they loved them differently, and we can't know what it felt like. This made Kate think of that lioness circling, wanting to protect her cub. When the cub was dead, Doug explained, Kate had made herself watch the film all the way through after Robin's bedtime. That same female would come into breeding condition and then accept the big male. It was a horror. But what was the mother to do? By then, with the cub dead, the lioness would not feel the whole experience as a horror. That had to be true in some way, but it also had to be not true. Kate had to feel that inside the mother, somewhere partitioned and sealed off, was grief, rage, unreconciled feeling. Her disturbed feelings had not gone away the next morning. In bed, she lay thinking about Robin's future. The climate, the flooding, food shortages, droughts, people fighting for high ground and shelter, closed borders, rationing, all of that stuff. Already people were drowning trying to get into England. Probably all of these things were going to get worse. Why couldn't that big male have seen the cub's face with its eager look and been moved by it? How did it know anyway that the cub wasn't its own? Did it smell different? Did the big male lion remember it hadn't had sex with that female? Could the young male have done anything to show submission? That day, she took Robin out on a walk. It was one of their favourites. Come on, she said, let's see if the lizards are there. At the edge of the wood was a mound of old rubble from some collapsed building dating back possibly to World War II. Bent, rusty iron bars protruded from great chunks of concrete. Parts of a brick wall stood just about holding together. All this was covered in brambles, wrapping their runners around concrete and pushing their way between bricks. Bracken and gorse filled the spaces between. Then, behind all the rubble, the wood banked up steeply. One day, walking with Robin that spring, Kate had stopped abruptly to look at a piece of concrete all crisscrossed with bramble. She didn't know why. Something had made her. A movement, perhaps. Her gaze rested there anyway. First on a pebble embedded in concrete. That's what they seem to have done, mixed the concrete with pebbles. War shortages, possibly. But on this concrete, there was a brown thing, and suddenly it was a lizard. Kate caught her breath. She felt her heart beating. Robin, she whispered, don't move. Now, carefully, gently, come here. He did. He was good at that. When he was at her side, Kate said, keep quite still and follow my finger. Ah, came his gasp. He had seen it. That day, Robin had wanted to catch it and keep it. But as soon as they moved, the lizard was gone. Too fast for them to see how. And Kate was glad, really. It lives there, she said to him. It would be sad in a glass tank. Robin had not given up the idea, she suspected. But anyway, in many visits, they had not seen the lizard again. This was not quite true. Kate had once seen it for a split second. Robin was too far away. She saw it quite clearly, a little head and 2 front feet, about to step onto the path, but poised in that moment. She blinked. It was no longer there. Her brain kept that image. God knew where that lizard was now. In some space deep in the brambles, a dark crevice under the stones, or long dead, digested by something, a crow maybe. Kate didn't know. But in her mind, she could still see it, poised there. One of her brain squiggles held it and would till she died. So she hoped. Robin was always hopeful of seeing one, so On the morning after the day of the lion cub, he told Kate to hang back. "Let me go first, Mum. You're too big. You'll scare it." Kate idled, happy to let him. Perhaps he would see one. She hoped, though, that he wouldn't catch it. The spring sun was nice on her face. A butterfly caught her attention. She followed it, watching it settle and open its wings. Small tortoiseshell. Kate always liked them. She watched the wings closing and opening until her gaze went off after a bumblebee. Then she stopped short. She had spotted a curious thing. In the woods up the bank was a small patch of light. Kate stared. A hole seemed to go all the way through the wood to white sky on the other side. One step either way and it vanished. Each time she thought she had lost it and wouldn't see it again. Once it took several tries. After that, she worked out the position she had to stand in, just left of a large clump of nettles. She was fascinated. It seemed so strange, a dense wood with most of the trees in new leaf. But there was this little round window right through. I won't call Robin, she thought. He won't see it. He's not the right height. Just a patch of light, a round opening, but Kate felt held to it. And as she stared, her anxiety started to grow. A thought had gripped her. This wasn't an entrance to Narnia or any similar fantasy world. This was a tunnel that led to the future, our future. On the other side, in that white light, was the world in 20 or 50 years' time. And Robin was in that world somewhere. It wasn't a hole she could enter, too small, too high in the trees, but nonetheless, there was the future. A little way off, she could catch sounds and smells, sense some movements. Yes, as she stood there, she thought she heard sounds coming through. What were they? Traffic sounds? Moaning sounds? Murmurs? Nothing was clear. A scent reached her also. If she found just the right place, it swarmed into her nose, rank and salty. It made her throat catch. As with the tunnel of light, if you moved just an inch, the scent vanished completely. But if you stood in the right place, it was everything, filling the air, arousing her skin. So what was it? She couldn't tell, couldn't say even that it was bad, but it might be. Someone had told her once that in history, you could smell marching armies when they were miles away, all the sweat and soiled clothing, and this smell did seem to have something to do with bodies. Were they happy, or sick, or scared, or wounded? She just didn't know. Maybe a future was coming in which all the deodorant would have gone. Come on, Mum. Okay, just 1 minute. But nothing became any clearer. She would have to leave soon, step away, break the contact. One more thought. Kate was afraid for those people. What would they have had to experience? She thought of them gathered, perhaps at their end of the tunnel, trying to catch sounds and scents from her world. If they knew she was trying to hear them, what would they call to her? What sort of warnings or reassurances? To them, she wanted to call, "Be kind to my son. Be a world he can live in. Don't be a hardened world, please." And this please loosened something inside her. She stepped back. Her hand brushed a nettle. The steam and the throb came at once. Kate rubbed her hands gently. The tunnel was gone now. She stood in the sunlight, uncertain, and Robin's voice came again. Mum! Thank you for listening to a long story.
非常不对。
谢谢两位老师，吴明益老师跟Kerridge老师今天很精彩的朗读。那中场休息10分钟后，我们就继续听每个老师带大家进入今天对谈的部分。好，现在4点05分，是我们4点15分继续。 那个提醒现在的那个第二个小时对门的部分。
Thank you both for those wonderful readings. I think well, there probably already some seeds emerging of that we can talk about for the next hour. Really, I mean, when we met online, we talked a little bit about what kind of cover. My role in this conversation will be really just to kind of keep you talking to each other. And I think maybe what we can start off with, though, is if we both could maybe tell our audience a little bit about how you became the writers that you are. I mean, in a sense, I know it was just kind of, that's all we're talking about. But how did you develop an interest in writing nature? How has your writing changed over time? I think Women's Seaways Club is very different from the things that we started out writing. And the story that you read today, Richard, is very different from the stories of and if you could both maybe reflect a little bit on the development, on your development as a writer. And I don't know who wants to go first.
开始讲的话，就是这边可以跟大家分享一下，刚刚被到出来开头的时候引用的那个是《沙逊年记》的里面的一段引文，然后他讲就是说生态启蒙的一个代价，就是说我们必须要活在一个充满了伤痕的世界。对，所以就是这边再跟各位补充一下。那这边的话就是很感谢刚刚两位的朗读。那么其实，在刚刚朗读当中，其实应该就已经有一些今天谈话的一些主题就慢慢的出现了。那在这个状况下的话，其实我们之前在线上开会的时候，其实也讨论到一些，就是我们今天是可以谈论的主题。那我今天的作用的话，其实就是就是让你可以畅所欲言的，就是一个引言的这个概念。那么今天的话，我想首先可能就是可以跟观众稍微讲一下，说就是你们是为什么会走上这一条写作之路？那么，比方说Kerridge 的话，他其实他的前一本书的内容，其实就在讲说他童年以来开始对于自然以及养殖类的这些所燃起的兴趣。但是就是说，其实也知道是你近期的这些作品跟你过去的作品是有蛮大的差别。比方说《海风酒店》过去的作品其实是不太一样的。那么Richard Kerridge 的话也是如此，就是说过去是非虚构了，现在是开始尝试小说的写作。所以说，我想在这边的话，可以先请各位稍微聊聊作为作家的这一个心路历程。
好，那我发言的尽量简短，因为今天重点面听就说Kerridge到经验因为我的读者可能也对我很熟悉了。那我自己变成一个自然作家是意外哦，不是一个原本目标。那在这个 Cover 里面，那个比如说Kerridge有写到他的一些童年经验，我是完全没有童年自然经验的。我就是台北市繁华的西门町长大，一点都没有自然经验的。但是到我研究所的时候，我自己因为一个意外开始对自然产生兴趣，就是去当这个导览员。但其实也不是当导览员，我只是去挡风，负责擦标本箱啊，打扫环境。是在百货公司里面的一个昆虫展览。那因为找不到工作，然后考上研究所，中间然后赚学费，那就因此我开始着迷那些标本，所以我就问了实际上那个展览的导览员，就是说你们怎么做这些标本？他们就教我，所以我就每天跑到阳明山上去，开始做标本，甲虫的啦，蝴蝶的啦。那当时那批导览员我印象很深刻，因为在我那个时代，台湾的图鉴很少，图鉴的品质也不好所以都没有办法说你看书就可以查到一个正确的资讯，很多都错的。那但是那批导览员是，我觉得是台湾很特别的一批开始对
自然野外有兴趣的人，他们还有汽车维修员。但当时在那个百货公司里面，就是如果你是导览员的话，1个小时的钟点费好像是200还是300，因为我是打扫工读生，只有60块、70块，我们那个时代大概是这样。那我就觉得说，好像他们赚的比较多，所以我就非常热情的了解他们导览的内容。后来我就变导览员了，但是我本来是想当作家的，就是很正常的台湾的作家那个形象。但是我到了研究所的时候，第一本书的出版并没有引起什么样的回响。那我的编辑问我，就说有没有什么作品是有别于我想当的那样子的作家，我就把我写蝴蝶的一些文章也都是没有发表。这也是导致我后来都不走发表的这条路的一个重要的原因。那他说这个很有趣啊，写蝴蝶的一些生命经验，我自己的生命经验，那所以就走上了这条路。所以一开始可以说是一个机缘，接下来就诱发我的热情了。我发现我可以对这个昆虫的热情跟文学的热情相当，有时候还超过。我那时候把我的机车卖掉，就是买一些望远镜啊或者相机的一些配备。大概我大部分的时间都不在学校上课，因为我那时候念中央大学的中文所，课实在很轻松，我就混时间，那我就跑去拍照，对，就写，我非常热情这件事，好像做标本啊，整理蝴蝶的生态资料，这件事占据了我大部分的时光。那这又延迟了一段时间，就是中间的几部作品，其实都来自于这样的热情。那第3个阶段就变成责任，因为在台湾，你要从90年代、80年代到90年代，是台湾的环境运动跟政治运动很深结合的时代。现在又没有，现在没有的原因是因为民进党变执政党，对他很尴尬，他很多事情没有办法像他在野党的时候反对。这不多说。但总而言之，就是它变成一个好像政治运动跟环境运动结合的一个活动即使说你只是做生态观察，你都会渐渐的受它影响。所以我就开始写不但是观察生态的文章，也把观察生态跟人的环境这件事情扣连在一起。但随着我这部分写作的为人所知，这个责任越来越重很多生态团体或者是抗争的运动都会想到我写文章啊，或者可能想办法让这个讯息扩散出去。那到了一个我觉得失控的地步，就是因为总是这样子在整个运动当中，我们会觉得自己好像什么都懂，越来越重要。其实懂得很有限，我也不相信那个叫 Kerridge 一定可以感受到这件事，就是他对两栖类、爬虫类有兴趣，可是那就像是一个无止境的宇宙一样。那也许我们对水资源，因为现在台湾的水资源是很重要的一个环境议题，我们对核能的议题有些看法。最近彭志贤先生完全改变了他的核能立场，但实际上我们懂得是很皮毛的。可在运动里面，我们都站上台或者写文章，写文章也不能写得很心虚嘛，不能写说我其实不太懂，我的意见是什么什么。所以我觉得有点失控，失控就是这个责任导致我的人格上面的失控，很像现在的社群媒体的生态一样。所以我在写海丰酒店的时候，又回到了一个比较根本的姿态，那就是确实在当时有很多人签了把自己的土地卖出去，给他们开发水泥厂。确实有很多人只是因为抽奖抽到了一台除湿机，他就改变了立场。这其中有人性的部分，动物性的部分。我刚刚在听这个Richard Kerridge 先生朗读他的这个新作， 这个反面小说的时候，有一段非常有感觉，那就是现在非洲的狮群都有录影，各位可能不知道，你们上网都可以看到每一个狮群都有人追踪录影，所以对于每个狮群的前世今生都有很清楚的交代。但是雄狮会杀死自己子嗣这件事情，是科学家早就知道了，那现在变成我们的日常。就是说，你如果看了，你会目睹这样的一件事情，因为为了自己的血缘嘛，雄狮通常会把小狮子前任狮王的小狮子全部杀掉，重新让母狮发情再交配。这件事情已经违反人类文明建立起来的一些信仰，可是它在动物性里面又是这么真诚的存在，这么合理的存在。这两件事有一些矛盾。我们作为一个人的生存，把土地卖掉，获得金钱，合理的。某种程度，它非常符合我们心里的欲望。可是我们累积出来的文明，跟我们的对自然的思考，它会阻止你如果你有，我们现在不管讲正义或良心嘛，你可能会阻止你去做这件事。在某一决断时刻，你是模拟这样的。所以我刚听就是因为我们也是前几天才收到这个作品，很多的是很有感受。那个妈妈对小孩说：“这就是这样子。动物没有过去，没有未来，它只要当下，它活下来就是它的生命需要。”所以我在写《海风酒店》的时候，可能不是所有人读起来都是愉快的，因为其中没有正义的部分，或者说正义的部分没有被用一种很明确的方式去彰显，而是经过了11季网和403大地震，真正死了这10几个人里面有2/3的人是在步道上升的，对吧？有1/3的人就是这2座水泥厂，雅尼跟台尼中间的矿区，有几位矿工受困，有几位丧生。这个水泥开采真的对当地的这个水土保持没有问题吗？会在电视上看到那个崇德飞快山峰的那个画面，就是河滨水泥厂，就是海风酒店小说的场景。那这又经过了几十年了，那块地现在他们这一工水泥厂改变他们的策略，说他们要做生态观光了，他们扭曲了原本泰鲁格族对巨人的传说。你们如果去那个休息站，在星巴克的旁边有一个愿景馆，他去用了泰鲁格族的巨人传说。这个巨人就说：“哇，你看那个工厂把这个地方变得绿油油的。”变成一个美丽的地方，我不能说族人也接受了，事实上它就存在了。事实上，他也聘雇当地的族人当导览事实上，他也开出了支票，未来在这个地方发展生态观光，这非常矛盾，对吧？非常不知道怎么说。所以当一个神话被这个资本的集团，它可以拿去使用，他们也很高明的使用的时候，也有星巴克，又有水舞，又有原住民的贩卖区，又有太阳人，但是只在那一角告诉我们，泰鲁的主人很欢迎这个水泥厂的巨人来改变，变成乐园。那我能做的，我作为一个作家的责任，变成不是上街头，因为上街头。特别在这个时刻变得很困难跟10年前非常不一样。你们可以看到，现在环境运动在台湾上街头的人数是急速萎缩的。那我想用写小说的方式，把这个神话扭转回来，所以我用了比较魔幻的手法，让这个 在泰鲁格族神话里面，已经死掉的巨人有一个孪生弟，来扭转这个玄奘建国的神话。但是大概就是从我们讲的一个契机产生热情，产生责任，到现在也许我的写作生命很有限，也许我活的生命也很有限，我能做的一点点事情，就是用文字去翻转他们想要把历史或者想法改变成像刚刚那个Kerridge先生那个作品的最后，就是未来，孩子的未来，他读到了，他如果有一天去星巴克旁边读到的，就是泰鲁格族的巨人神话，就是那个样子，我也能接受。
Yes, that's a moving speech, and in many ways, what I have to say is quite similar, even though I was born in such a different place. I grew up in the suburbs of London, and this, to me, at the time, was quite a drab place. It was residential streets, it was roads, it was lots of traffic, it was school. And yet there was lots of wildlife as well. It was astonishing for me to realize that in an overgrown garden or perhaps patch, there were still patches of wasteland from the bombing when I was growing up in the Second World War, or a railway bank which was overgrown. You'd see animals. You'd see foxes, you'd sometimes see badgers, you would see lizards, hedgehogs, small animals like this. And this introduced an element of drama. So going out into nature was partly a kind of refuge from all the anxieties I had as a child. It was a way of forgetting them and concentrating very purely on something else, trying to see something, and being taken by surprise when you did see something. And at the same time, yes, sorry, am I not? Sorry, is that better? Yeah. At the same time, it was a way of somehow confronting some of the hard things about the world, because, of course, in watching these animals, you saw quite a lot of the randomness of fate, cruelty of fate, the suffering, the way some of these animals had been wounded. Some of them were old, some of them were predating each other. So it was, in a curious way, it gave you a drama that was both a very safe thing to watch because you weren't part of it, but at the same time was telling you the hard things that you needed to face about life. So I became more and more fascinated.
他们刚才的故事真的是非常的动人哦。那我自己的这个自己的故事其实也很类似，虽然我生长在完全不同的国度，就是我是生长在伦敦的这个郊区。那当时我生长的这个区域其实是一个非常无聊的一个地方，但它就是很多住宅区，很多的公路，然后路上非常多车，然后就是学校的生活。但很意外的就是说，我其实在当时我的生长的环境当中，其实也有非常多的这一些野生的动物存在。那么不管是在一些就是非常这个草木繁盛的这些花园里面，或者是说在这些当时还留下一些二次世界大战时候的一些荒地，或者是说在一些公路铁路的这一些区域的话，其实都可以看到非常多野生动物，比方说像是狐狸呀、然后刺猬呀等等的这些动物。所以其实我的生活当中，其实一直都存在着很多像这样子一些比较戏剧化的、比较不同寻常的这样子的故事。那对我来讲的话，那其实就是我的避风港，让我可以去找到一个地方去逃避掉我当时所面对到的焦虑以及不安，因为透过去观察像这样子的野生的动物，然后去面对到这些自然的环境，其实你都可以看到，就是说大自然当中的某一种这一种就是万物为刍狗的这种非常天地不仁的这些画面，这些场景。 然后可以看到这些动物，它们其实可能有受伤啊，或者它们也是有痛苦的。那这个东西对于当时的我来讲的话，其实就让我有一个好像比较安全的一个这个环境，因为你其实并不是在跟这些动物一样，就是在那边受苦，但还是依然可以让我们可以看到，让我当时看到说生命当中的许多的面貌。
And then I grew up, and I went to university to study literature. And at that time, writing about nature was really out of fashion. And people's attitude to it, if you admitted that you loved nature and enjoyed going out and looking for animals, people's attitude was that this was sentimental and nostalgic. And it was not facing the real world. And I suppose a really important realization for me that came quite late, it came through my growing environmental awareness, and it came through the work I began to do with eco-criticism, environmental criticism. I began to see that this was possible. What I realized was that actually paying attention to wild nature is looking at the real world. It is facing the uncomfortable truths. It is no longer escapist or nostalgic. I mean, there is nostalgia involved. One of the distresses of my life is that in my own lifetime, Britain has lost about 50% of its wildlife. Not in terms of species, very few species have gone, but in terms of sheer numbers. The habitat destruction, the use of pesticides and other chemicals in farming, these things have really depleted our wildlife. And so what was once a common experience of seeing a wild animal is now quite rare. It's quite hard to do. You have to go to special protected places. That experience I had as a child of the kind of teeming abundance around me it hasn't completely gone, but it's not there in the same quantities. And that became more and more oppressive to me, that recognition. So, yeah, always something. Yeah.
那么后来就是长大，然后去大学的时候念的就是文学的科系。那当时的环境其实，大家一般对于自然写作的态度其实是不太正面的，因为他觉得就是一种很天真的、很滥情的，然后一种只是一种很乡愁的这种回顾式的东西，然后没有在真正的去面对现实的世界。但是我后来的话，我就意识到说，当我开始对环境的意识越来越强，然后开始真的去开始投入这些生态的这些批评的写作的时候，我就意识到说，其实当你在面对这些自然、面对这些野生动物的时候，你其实正是在直面这样子的，就是真实的世界。然后它虽然也是存在一种乡愁的性质，但是它不只是如此。那我自己的话，在成长过程当中，一直以来的一个很忧伤的、很伤心的事情，就是在我的这个成长的过程当中，在英国其实有50%的野生动物都消失了。那这个不是在讲不是讲说物种就是灭绝，就是说物种灭绝的其实没有很多，而是就是真正的野生动物这个数量。那这个当然就是因为各种，比方说建农药啊，或者这些化学物质开发等等的这些原因。那么要像我自己的童年一样，就是说去看到这么多的野生动物这样的生活周遭，其实就变得非常的少见。那当然是，然后如果要看到野生动物跟它们亲近的话，就只能到这些特别的这些自然的保留区。那当然并不是说完全消失的，但是跟我过去的童年比起来是少了非常多。
Thank you. And so I began writing about nature, and I sent some pieces off to the BBC, and I was lucky that they were accepted, short pieces. And that's how it began. And I was lucky too, in that at that moment, nature writing came back into fashion hugely. There's been a great surge of nature writing in Britain over the last sort of 20 years or so, sometimes called the new nature writing. And I suppose my book, Cold Blood, was part of that surge. And of course, I was encouraged by the idea, and my publishers were more ready to accept the book because this was suddenly a fashionable genre. And nature writing in Britain, as everywhere, has a complicated history. It's been involved with other movements, such as Romanticism. A lot of it was mixed up with colonialism, of course. The scientists who tried to discover and rename and classify nature and give it Western names and so on. And this was part of the way in which colonialism took possession of so many places. So there's that history. And there is also the history of the use of nature writing as a sort of retreat from modernity, a kind of nostalgic search for a lost world before industrialization. This was particularly strong in the early 20th century. And so the genre came to be seen as conservative and anti-modern. And again, it was because of the emergence of awareness of environmental threats in the later part of the 20th century that the genre changed. It was no longer conservative and nostalgic. It was now concerned with some of the most desperate and forward-looking and important problems of our times. So, yep.
那么我后来就是开始在写作这个自然写作的时候，我们就写了一些短文，然后投稿给我的 BBC， 然后很幸运的就被接受了这样子。那我说从此开始我的这个自然写作的这个生涯。那我当时其实也非常幸运，因为就是在我开始写作的那个时候，自然写作重新的又回到了英国的这一个写作的这个主流。那在过去这20年来的话，其实都是英国自然写作的一个黄金的时期。 那甚至有人在讲说，这个就是所谓的英国的新自然写作。那我自己的书，也就是能写这本书的话，也是包含在这一波的这个潮流的一部分。那我当时的比方说出版社等等的开始愿意去接受我的这本书，其实也是因为当时这样子的题材是受到很大的欢迎。 那么，英国的这一个自然写作传统，其实是有一个非常复杂的历史的。它是跟英国的这个奥黛主义其实有很大的关联。那么，它同时也跟英国的殖民历史有很深的牵连。因为，比方说，当科学家们他们希望去为各种物种，然后去分类，然后去命名的时候，这其实也是殖民国家试着去占有或者去容纳这一些。 新的这个物种的其中的一环。那么，所以除此之外的话，英国的这个自然写作还有另外一支，就是说，它跟这种人们想要回归到某一种大地的母亲，然后重新回到一个失落的世界的这种渴望，其实是也有很大的关系的。所以，这个在20世纪早期的时候，就是一个很大的一个主流。 那也是因为如此，所以自然写作的曾经有一段时间被视为就是一种非常过时的，然后怀旧的这样子一个问题。那可是，在20世纪的后半叶开始，因为我们开始对于环境的这一些威胁开始有更深刻的意识，所以自然写作也跟这样子的一波潮流连接在一起，因此自然写作就重新回归到了一个主流，因为他们在处理的就是当代非常迫切的一些议题。
Okay, I just want to say two things quickly and then perhaps take the discussion further. One is that having written my nature writing memoir called Blood, I felt it was really important to try to explore nature, wild nature and environmentalism through points of view other than my own, to try to understand other points of view. And that was one of the things that took me to fiction. In a sense, I was tired of my own voice. Of course, the fiction is my own voice as well, but it is my own voice ventriloquizing other characters. And also, in that fiction, it came to seem to me more and more, as it has to many writers, including, I think, yours, that realism wasn't enough. It was a necessary part of the writing, but it wasn't sufficient. Why is that? Most fundamentally, it is because our current predicament is that we are not facing reality. Now, realism, of course, restricts itself to that which is generally seen to be possible. It is something that we can literally accept as possible. But we are in the predicament facing climate change and facing the biodiversity crisis of not looking at reality, turning away from it. We are not behaving as if we really knew what we do know about these hazards. And so realism, in a curious way, becomes restrictive. It becomes the confirmation of a false normality. And there's a line in The Man with Compound Eyes which sums this up very nicely. It's when one of the characters says, the past few days he's been bringing students and volunteers to gather creatures that washed up dead on the beach. They found shrimps, sea urchins, sea cucumbers, brittle stars, hermit crabs and true crabs. He says there are many species he's never seen before. I asked him whether the sea would return to normal someday, and he said there's no such thing as normal anymore. Everything's changed. And so I suppose my attempts at mixing the unrealistic with the realistic are an attempt to begin to represent that change.
那我们这边的话，在结束这段发言之前的话，我想要讲两件事情。那第一个就是说，其实我在写作这本书的时候，在面对的就是这一个自然的写作，以及就是我们在环境当中有希望可以用一些不同观点，然后去看待这些事情。那或者是说，就是在这个过程当中，我开始意识到说，我好像不能将过去的这种这种方式去面对，然后正是因为这件事情，我开始去写作小说，去写作构的题材，因为我可以说就是我开始去厌倦了过去的这种语调跟声调。那当然就是说，小说也一样是我自己的个人创作，可是就是它是我在透过别人的声音去发言。所以，但是代表说，就是我开始意识到说我自己的这个观点其实是不够的。那这个可能也是很多就是开始转向，就是虚构写作的很多作家的时候，同样的有类似的心路历程。那为什么会转向这一个虚构写作呢？那其实有一个很大的原因就是，我觉得我要回应的是我们现在当代所面对到的很多的问题。那我认为有很多的问题都是回到，就是说我们并没有办法真正的去面对我们所身处的现实。那我们似乎比方说，因为写实主义，就是我开始做虚构的写作的话，真的我的意向是想要从写实主义给里面脱出来，因为写实主义似乎都被限制在我们已经知道的这样子的一个世界里面。那么对我来讲的话，其实现在很大的问题，其实说当我们在面对气候变迁等等这样子的问题的时候，我们其实没有真正的去面对我们说面对到的现实，就是我们在逃避我们其实已经知道的这一些事情。所以我认为，我们必须要从写实主义里面脱出来，才有办法去面对这样子的一些我们真正所面对到的的真实的世界。那我想在复眼人里面的话，有一段我非常喜欢的段落，它里面就是有个角色，他在谈到说，就是我们在过去的这段时间，然后我们就是聚集了很多学生，然后还有很多的志工，然后我们在海边，然后在做应该是净滩之类的这样子的活动。那么我们看到非常多的海生的物种等等的，可是这些好像都慢慢在消失，所以到底也有办法回到真正的正常的日常吗？但是另外一个角色他就说，就是没有办法回到真正的日常，因为真正的日常是不存在，一切的事物都是在变动。那么我想就是我开始去从事虚构的写作，就是希望我可以用这种非写实的东西去真正的去回应以及看待我们所面对的现实。
Maybe do you want to respond to that? Because I think what Richard just said about this sort of the need to break with conventional forms of realism that's of course something that I think one can see something very similar happen in your work, but in a way that's distinctive from the way that Richard did it, for example, in the story that he just read. And I'm sure you have something to respond there.
我非常认同的
sorry，就是就是说，那这边的话，就想请问，就是我们教授，就是说，因为你可以看到，就是说，在你的作品当中也有这种东西，就是主义的传统当中去脱离出来这样的一个倾向，但是其实方式跟就我们看到刚刚的去 Kerridge 作品当中是不太一样的，所以你有什么想到回应的部分？
其实我想主要概念是一样，因为人类文明的最神奇的地方，就是它能够想象自己存在一个空间。想象自己如果做了另外一个决定会怎么样因为我自己养了一个女人嘛，所以我重新看到语言在她身上发生作用。有一次呢，我带她去阿里山，回来之后，她就一直扮演准备去阿里山这件事。她已经从阿里山回来，她会重新拿出她的包包，说我要带什么去阿里山，她就。我们会带什么水啊，带什么东西？他说带水龙头。我说为什么？你为什么要带一个水龙头去阿里山呢？他说在山上没有水龙头啊，所以我带着那个水龙头去装，要把我们没有水可以用的时候怎么办？这是一个城市小孩，他想到了一个解决方式。但我认为，但同时他也是跟真实脱节，跟真实的生活方式脱节，因为它的水的来源确实就是水龙头。但是人类的这个能力，我觉得就是在小说家的身上是特别珍贵的。所以过去的一些对自然的想象对自然的恐惧，对自然的崇拜，其实都是来自于人类的想象力。所以我完全认同说，这个真实现实的部分有时候没有办法解释我们现在心里面的意念，所以我必须介入，就是超越现实的世界。
Richard, you want to respond?
Well, quickly, because we need some questions, don't we?
I think we're going to go to the question part, because
But I just wanted to say, I do agree with what you've said. And in your work, there are so many cross currents, so many different points of view, from so many different traditions, perspectives, historical moments. There are different indigenous traditional cultures with their stories and myths. There are modern scientists, there are people involved in industry, there are artists. It's as if you're kind of convening a whole community of people to address this and to tell their different stories. And that makes such a rich, complex response that it really makes optimism possible.
那我这边就是稍微简短的回应啊，就是说我觉得确实就是在吴明老师的作品当中，其实也看到就是说我们如何去透过就是各种不同的眼光，然后去重新去看待现实。那在你的小说当中的话，我们可以看到有非常多的不同观点，非常多的历史，有不同原住民的族人，然后不同的科学家，然后这些水泥业的业者以及艺术家选聚在一起。那好像就是说，我们在这个所构成的一个广大的这个群体当中的话，人们都开始在讲述自己的故事，所以它像是一个交织出来一个非常复杂的网络当中，确实就好像可以让我们去想象一个比较好的一个乐观的未来是可能的。
I think what both of you are talking about, both of what you were saying, to me, that speaks to the introduction to that first collection of essays like, when I said that, I kept quoting that. It's the one phrase that I keep quoting from that introduction is when you say the environmental crisis is also a crisis of the imagination. And that's why writing, why writers like you have such an important role to play. I think with that, we should open the floor to questions from the audience. And maybe if we get questions from the people who are attending online, maybe we have some time for that as well. We're not going to have to stick like super, we don't have to stop at 5 o'clock sharp, but we can't run over for too much. So I think, please, if our audience has questions for our distinguished guests, this is the time to ask. After that class.
那我想就是两位谈的东西都可以回到就是Richard先生，然后在大概就是多年前所编的这一个自然批评的生态批评的这个选集当中，然后他在这一篇他的导言当中的话，其实就有讲到一个很重要的一段我很喜欢的一段话，就是说其实所谓的生态危机就是想象力的危机。那我想，也正是因为如此，所以作家在我们这个时代是扮演非常非常重要的一个任务跟一个角色。那我想，就是从这一段话开始，我们就也许可以开放就是现场这个问答。对，因为我想，就是这个机会是一个聊聊的时间，就不管是现场的观众或者在线上的观众，如果有各位有问题的话，那因为我们可以稍微超时一点点，可是就是也不能超时太多，所以就是会把握这个机会，跟两位老师，然后可以来问一些你们实作的问题。
我是好，然后请问就是在谈到生态书写的时候，就是对我们会认为就是物种或者是环境有关系有关系的，但是如果今天我们使用的物种当做一个符码符号，但是我们是用它来说自己想要说的事，这样子有时候会稍微生活一些，就是一条路是生态书写的，或者就是书写生态、书写人造，或者是说就是成长的一些这个物种对生活的。
比如说看到燕子想要录下来，你的意思是？
就是或者是有些死黑甲虫，它是一种会追求就是生国家产权的政策，然后我就觉得这是个有趣的符号，它可以就是它至少是。最重要用它来解释的就是被直接说成话，你写的还是写的，但是你在说的东西是，然后跟生态的是有写来说的话，这样子真的是生态的东西吗？
So the question is sometimes when we write about environments, they use different kind of species to talk about what we want to talk about. And sometimes this is like, for instance, we use different species, but what we want to say is about ourselves, or for instance, our human perspective. So in this case, does this constitute the kind of nature writing?
Yes. Sorry, is this working? It's working better. Yes. Okay. One of the commonest forms of the new nature writing is the personal memoir, in which somebody tells their own story, as I did, and combines it with a lot of natural history information. And so this is about what these animals have meant to a particular person. Yes, in terms of symbolism, in terms of a kind of implied metaphor. And the people who didn't like my book very much, when they wrote in Amazon or Goodreads, they said two things they tend to do. Some people said, well, I really was interested in the reptiles and amphibians, but I didn't want all that personal story about his childhood and his emotions. And then there was another kind of reader who said, oh, I really loved the personal story. He was such an interesting character, but I was a bit bored by all this scientific stuff. So that is the combination that at least that kind of nature writing is trying to achieve. Yes, it is directly and as far as possible objectively about the natural world, the wild creatures, the animals, the climate, the landscape, whatever it might be. But it is also about what these things mean to some people. Often it's the cultural history of what these things have meant in a particular culture, as well as the personal experience. And it is the need to combine these things so that the natural world is part of the human world, the world of the human imagination. That's what I think marks the genre, particularly in its contemporary form.
当然，其实你刚刚在提的这个，就是现在新的这个自然书写在英国的一个很重要的一个元素，那就是现在的非常多的这些新的自然书写，它都是以回忆录的个人回忆录的形式去写成的。比方说，我们把自己的个人故事以及跟这个自然史的这些东西交织在一起来写作，透露对于这些物种的自己的个人的各种所思所感。然后去这个方式，然后来进行这个写作。但其实我自己的这一本书能写到出版的时候，其实就有时候在有一些就是比较负评的这些声音，比方说可能像 Kerridge 或者在网络上面的一些这些书评的平台的话，其实会分成两类。有一种的话，那就是说我很喜欢就是里面的自然的部分，可是我很讨厌就是里面在讲这么多个人相关的事情，觉得好像很无聊。但也有另外一种，刚好相反，就是说，就是我很喜欢讲这些个人的这些思路，然后这些情感，可是就是里面的这些自然史的这些东西，我就觉得有点无聊。对，可是其实就刚好相反，但恰恰就是在结合就是自然与人文的这一个部分的话，其实是现在的这个自然书写的一个很重要的目标。那如果我们可以去把就是自然以及我们的这一个自然所赋予我们在我们心中所产生的这一些意义，把它连接在一起的话，那我们就可以将自然的世界跟我们所在的这个人类的人文的世界，然后可以变成一个很完整的其中的一环。
确实，这个类型的写作它比较早比较传统，但是不代表它现在就没有意义了。因为刚刚那个就是Richard Kerridge 他讲到，就是说现在英国的一批新的自然写作者，常常会把回忆录跟他的生态成长交织在一起。台湾其实前几年有翻了一本，我觉得很好的，就是英文说是，等一下。不是英语新的追寻这本书，它叫我看一下它的英文书名 ，H is for home， 对，像这个就是他的寻音的经过跟他的父亲之间的回忆，所以它也不代表就是说是一个过时的写法，就是当然它是比较早期就已经发生了这样的写作。但有一个特殊之处，就是这批他们都有生态知识，可能你30年前、50年前，他联想到这个物种跟自己的情感的这一批人是没有什么生态知识，也不愿意去了解生态知识的，可能有这么一点的差别，在台湾，特别在台湾状况。
We can still take another question. Ellen, please.
像老师也刚才有讲到说那个平台我在设的，就是我想请问你觉得像是文学作跟其他的艺术媒介或者说一些这些理想，它有什么在表达这些议题，或者说艺术表现，或者是让我追求有什么长处？然后I want to ask so I know both of you are versatile writers, and I'm wondering what do you think about like
fiction. I mean, short stories and novels, their strength in terms of maybe artistic expression or there's awareness of the things that I was talking about. Like, I know you talk about imagination and like how your ball is thinking like different. Interesting to know more.
就因为我现在正在看片子哦，看台湾今年的国际纪录片的这些作品。纪录片这个类型原本它就 documentary， 它就记录，照理说它应该是非常一致性，在使用的手法非常一致性。可是发展以来，你可以看到现在的纪录片，它的表现方式真是超级多元。有时候会让你非常惊讶，说哦，它这算不算纪录片呢？它为什么可以这样子去跨越？那我想提这一点的原因就是，你看到现在影展啊，去观众还很多，他们会讨论，他们会在某一个时间点聚在那个地方交流。可是文学好像失去了这样子的一个吸引力。可能在50年前，他可能会有很热络的讨论，那现在好像没有这样的一个具体的模式，可以让大家热烈的讨论文学。可另外一方面，文字或者语言这个东西，它有很大的空间跟想象力。我在上礼拜的上上礼拜上课，因为我现在上一门影像诠释。反正就是转译的课，整种文字转译这项的课，我放了一部这个短片，好像2004年他得到奥斯卡的短片奖，叫《Six Shooter》。这部片子很古怪啊，就它光讲它的剧情很古怪，它的拍摄也很有特色。但是我在课堂上呢，我是先用嘴巴讲一遍，这个时候呢，我就问同学们。对于我刚刚讲的那一段叙事的感受，他们的脑袋就很像摄影机一样，每个人会创作出不同的画面，去结构那个故事。那我在放这部作品出来给他们看的时候，他们在从中跟自己脑袋里面想象的影像，产生了一种很有趣的、很激烈的对话。所以当我问他们说：“哎，这个剪辑有什么特别之处？”马上有同学说：“哦，那个少年杀手坐的那个位置旁边摆了一个猴子的玩偶，那猴子玩偶当然是个象征啊，当然就是非常文学性的象征。那这件事情，他先把我的原文字影像化之后，再回到文字而得到的。我觉得现在或许未来，因为我现在每个世代交替的太大了。”我觉得在文学教育的这批老师，必须更快的换血，更快的产生流动，因为这个时代，拆解文字或面对文字的方式很多元。如果我们还是用一样的方式去对，恐怕这个没有办法。其实这也是我希望就是Richard Kerridge。待会可以一并回应这位听众问题，也是我的回应，就是您怎么上创作课？可不可以讲一点你的特别的方法
？Yes, I will try. I suppose one point to make immediately is that if we are to imagine and conceptualize the things that we most need to, that is to say, the changes in human consciousness, human behavior, human emotion that are necessary if we are going to do anything about climate change, then it has to be fiction because it's not happening in reality. Fiction, I mean, as soon as we start to imagine this, we are in effect writing fiction, aren't we? Or whether that turns out to be a short story or a novel or a film script. Or any other kind of art, perhaps doesn't matter so much. The point is that the dimension of fiction is also the dimension in which we can begin to try to imagine the futures that we need, the changes that it seems to be so difficult to imagine in practice. And of course, I include myself in this. I'm no better than anybody else. I haven't made the changes that are necessary any more than anyone else has. But whenever we attempt to do so, we are inventing fictions. That's an answer.
那么首先的话，就是我觉得，如果我们要真的去思考、去想象这些真正重要的议题，比方说如何去改变人的这些思维意识的话，那其实然后让我们可以去面对气候变迁的挑战的话，那我觉得这个必然就是一个必须要以虚构的形式，因为我觉得现在的话，就是现实这些手段是不够的。那我觉得不管是用小说，或者是用其他的形式的话，这个其实也许并不是这么重要，而且重点是说，我们必须要透过虚构的形式，因为才有办法去想象我们现在所需要的这个未来的图像。因为就是我们现在真的要去想象，就是我们所需要这个未来，其实在现实的方面已经是非常困难的事情。那其实我个人也必须要承认，就是说我在现实上面去改变自己的生活，这个东西其实是做的还令人佩服的。跟各位跟大家分享。
I'm afraid that we have a restaurant reservation at 5:30. So I'm very much inclined, I would be inclined to just keep going because I can see that there are more questions in the audience, but I'm afraid we'll probably have to wrap up. But really, thank you both very much for agreeing to do this, for reading your work and each other. And I think, well, I hope that this is not the end of the discussion, even though for today we're going to have to wrap up. Thank you. I see many students in the audience as well. I'm very pleased that you took off your precious Saturday afternoon to listen to two literary writers, but I'm sure we didn't regret it. Thank you everybody. Well, actually, thank you also to our two interpreters who have done a marvelous job to facilitate other staff members help to make this happen. And Conrad, I think I'm gonna pass I'm just gonna show up.
所以接下来两位老师就是还有5点半有一个餐具，所以虽然感觉到就是大家还意犹未尽，但是真的就是我们必须要在这边先打一个终点这样子。那也希望这一次现在的结束并不是真的结束，而是讨论开始这样子。那么也非常感谢两位老师的朗读以及分享。那么就是如果后续的话还有什么的话，我们希望可以这个讨论继续发酵。
最后，我请简章给今天活动的真实的了解，谢谢。
今天我想大家都是收获满满的一天，尤其是听到 Richard 的小说，然后那个结尾的那个 cast 的呼喊啊，让我们会想起华语小说最早的第一篇鲁迅的《狂人日记》的结尾也是救救孩子吧，然后所以 Richard 的小说告诉我们说，对我们孩子好一点，打造一个让他们更好的生活世界啦，不要让他们生活在一个经济变革的环境里。我想这应该是我们去思考自然文学书写里头共同的心声。那其实我刚刚提到很多书写的技巧或面向，我觉得大家其实更有机会认识两位作家的话，应该会知道他们其实是很多身体力行的哈。我讲一个我观察到努力的故事。有一天我进系办公室，凌晨吧因为我以前工作都到很晚，怎么突然发现我的办公室里面的会议室里头有青蛙的声音传出来，然后是明义去晚上去校园观察的时候听到了一个青蛙的声音，他要确认那个青蛙是什么，他就上了网络，然后在电脑上面一个一个的听那个声音，想要确认他到底刚刚在学校里面发现了什么物种。 他就是这样子的一个身体实践的人。然后甚至有一年，他跟学生说：“放寒假了，我们要不要一起走路回台北啊？”那自己真的走，然后下雨，然后走到头枕了，然后那个脚都受伤了这样子。那 Richard 一样，他其实时差都还没倒过来，他已经去爬山了，那所以我想，他们身上有更多很明显的特质，是今天在这个活动里头没有办法充分展现出来的，更不要说像明益讲的一个生态作家对社会的责任，以及他自己那种充满自省的思索跟反省啊，然后现实到底该如何改变，我们都不知道啊。我刚刚才上礼拜去开了这个我们地理系办的这个生态跟永续变迁的研讨会，泰国的学者告诉我们说，他们的陆地不断的消失，所以最好的方法是种水鼻子、红树林。然后，难道真的只有这个解方吗？我想两位今天都告诉我们，就是写实或科学有时候不能提供我们更有想象力的答案，未来到底该如何来变得更好？我想文学应该会给我们更多有力量的答案。今天是非常收获满满的一天，也祝福 Richard 去花莲，虽然前途很危险但是也希望你有更大的收获，也希望未来台湾成为你笔下的一个世界，然后再带给世界上的人更多理解我们的一起共同的努力跟对美好的向往。谢谢大家，谢谢。